Hey, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces today. Today we're going to be talking about how to mix and blend oil pastels of lots of different colors. And the first thing we want to do is have a picture that's worth doing that to. So I'm going to start by just grabbing a Sharpie here and writing. I'm going to split this page into a lot of small shapes by writing some really big letters to spell out a word. So I'm going to write the word smile here, but I'm going to make it huge. And so instead of like writing a little bitty S, I'm going to, I'm turning my paper lots of different directions too. I'm going to start with a big, huge S. And you can see how that has already made one shape here. Notice that I've touched the edge of my page there, and I've touched the edge of my page there. And then I'm going to make the M maybe down here. So something like that. And then the I, maybe I'll close this gap here with the I. Again, making it super huge. And then I need an L and an E. And in the end, you're not going to be able to actually read this, but you're going to know that there's a word hidden into your picture. And so I'm going to make the L here. Again, touching the edge of the page. And I think I'm going to turn my paper this way for the E. Let's close that off. And make that E go really long all the way to the edges. So the point here is that the letters are coming together to break the page up into these small shapes. So I've got a couple of triangles underneath my M. I've got this weird shape in here that almost looks like a puzzle piece. I've got this sort of boxy shape here. I got a couple of rectangle-y shapes and lots of different shapes, and that'll be fun to color those in. And now that we've got that, I'm going to focus on one shape at a time and pick, here I've got these Pentel oil pastels. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go buy these. These, in my opinion, are the best bang for your buck if you're buying oil pastels. There are other good brands out there, but these ones are, they're good and they're not too expensive. Anyway, I've just got a set of 25 colors here. And I'm going to pick two of them. Any two will do, but I'm going to at least start here by picking two colors that are similar. So for example, these two greens are very similar. I've got a medium green and a light green. You don't have to start with two similar colors. You could just jump right in and use any colors you want, but the objective here is to learn how the colors blend together and what happens when you blend different combinations of colors. So play around with it and use whatever colors you want. I'm going to pick which side. I'm going to do what's called a gradient. So I'm going to blend from one to the other going this direction. So I'll start with my medium green at the top. When I blend with oil pastels, I always like to start with the darker color for some reason. I think the reason for that is because you can very easily control how much of the darker color you put down. For example, up here at the top where I want it to be nice and dark, I'm pushing down pretty hard. I mean, not hard enough to break it, obviously, but hard enough to get a nice, thick, solid color. And then as I move along, I'm going to press down a little bit less, and a little bit less, and a little bit less, and a little bit less, until I'm a little bit past halfway across. And by this point, I want it to be very faint. So I'm just letting gravity do the work. I'm not actually pushing down at all. Okay, and I'll stop and leave a nice huge area here to be just the lighter color. Now the reason I like to start with the darker color is because I always like to use the lighter color to actually do the blending. So what I'm going to do here is push nice and hard and fill this whole side over here until I reach the edge of my darker color. Now from this point, I still want to keep pushing hard. See how I'm pushing this hard enough and filling it completely so there's no little white gaps. Like here, there's lots of tiny little white gaps, and here, there's no little white gaps. I want to keep going like this all the way across, and as I do that, it's going to blend with whatever color is underneath it. So here, I'm still pushing down. I'm not lightening the pressure at all. It's just going to mix with whatever's underneath it and make it just a tiny bit darker. And you can see that so far it's had very little influence because there's so little of the darker green underneath it. I might need to go back and add a little bit more of that darker green. We'll see. But you want this to be a fairly smooth transition. You don't want it to be light green on one side, dark green on the other with a line between them. You want it to be a nice smooth transition, which is what we've got here so far. If you look here, it's nice and light, and it's getting just a little bit darker as it comes across, not much. And here, as we move into the darker sections, you'll see a nice smooth transition here. Okay? And so if I kind of cover up the middle and you just look here, this is lighter, here, this is darker, lighter, darker, lighter, darker. But if we look at the whole thing all together, it looks like one continuous color that just is a little bit darker over here and a little bit lighter over there. That transition, there's not a line in between the two colors. And so again, the way I did that is I started with the dark color and lightened my load as I went across. And then with the lighter color, I went back and pushed real hard the whole way across. In case you were under a rock, I'm going to do that again here. That first one, those colors were so similar that I think it might be a little harder to see. So I'm going to do it here with a slightly bigger gap between the colors. So for example, maybe I'll use a nice dark purple with a really pale pink. So that's a much bigger difference between the two colors. And I think we'll be able to see that gradient a little bit more plainly. Now this one, the gradient goes this direction. Maybe on this one I want the gradient to go some other direction. I don't know. So I think I'll have it go that way. Be dark purple on this side and bright pink on that side. So I'm going to start with my dark purple. Again, I always like to start with the darker color. And I start by pushing and filling completely. There we go. And then as I move across this way, I'm going to lighten it up. So I don't want to lighten it up too much yet. I want to lighten it up a little bit. And then lighten it up a little bit more. And lighten it up a little bit more. Until by this point, maybe about a 2/3 of the way across, I'm just letting gravity do all the work. I'm not pushing down at all. I'm just gently rubbing it across. And you can see that already makes a gradient from dark on this side to light on this side. But we don't want it to be dark purple to light purple to white. We want it to be dark purple to bright pink. So I'm going to go back in on this side. and start filling with my bright pink. And again, in order to blend the colors, I'm going to color over the darker color with the lighter color. Use the light color to color over the dark color, and push down while you're doing it. And as you push down, it will pick up what's underneath it. It will pick up the color that's underneath it and blend it together. So here I have filled that side with a nice bright pink. And I'm going to keep going the same way, keep applying the same amount of pressure as I move over into the slight purpley area. And you're not going to see much of a difference. I can barely see that it's a little tiny bit darker, but you might not even be able to see that on the camera here. I'm just going to push the same amount, blend it together, and as I'm picking up more of the purple, it's going to get a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker at a time until we have nothing but purple on the other side. And when you reach the area where the first color was just solid color, overlap that a little bit with your lighter color. And that finishes off the blending. And so I think you can see it a little bit better here than you did on the green, that we've got a transition smoothly from bright pink, a little bit dark, a little bit purpler, a little bit dark, a little bit purpler, until it's nothing but purple. And if it's not enough of a transition, you can always go back to your darker color and add a little bit very lightly, not pushing down at all, just very lightly add a little bit more of the dark color, because if you add too much dark too quick, you can't take back the darkness. It's always easier to make things dark than it is to make things light. And then you just go back and blend that in. So every time I add a little bit of dark, I blend it in with the light color. Okay, there you go. Now I'm going to do the rest of this whole picture here in time-lapse and then show you what it looks like at the end. But there's one last thing, or really two things, that I wanted to mention before I do that. And one, these little boogery things that come up off of your oil pastels, that's still usable. You don't want to like pick that off and throw it away. You'll see it on your paper too. There's these little clumps. You can rub those in. That's still usable. Don't pick that off and throw it away. The second thing is the paper. Now, with oil pastels, it's really easy to get messes all over your fingers and smudges all over everything. And to avoid that, you keep the paper on the oil pastels. And when the oil pastel gets down to the paper, just peel off a tiny little bit of the paper. Don't peel all the paper off. Keep the paper on there to keep your hands clean. And there you have it. This picture is finished. There's a few little things I wanted to point out. Thing number one is opposites on the color wheel, red and green, or if you had done the same thing with blue and orange, or with purple and yellow, anytime you have opposites on the color wheel, notice that they make a brown when you mix them together. Second thing I wanted to point out was what happens when you mix white. So I could have used a dark blue and a light blue, but I used a white here in particular just to show that the difference between when you color lightly with an oil pastel and it has that bumpy texture, but then when you blend it with the white, it smooths it out and makes it buttery smooth. So that's a big difference between that and just shading lightly with the color. Also, there are two places here where I mixed black with a color. On this case, it was black with a very light color. Here it's black with a sort of medium to dark color. And in both of those cases, the darks get really super dark very quickly. Black overpowers any other color very quickly. Even this purple that is already kind of dark, when it started mixing with the black, it turned really dark really quick. And even this very, very pale blue with just a tiny bit of black, it started to get really dark really quick. So black will overpower your colors when you're mixing. So you always want to use very little of that to start and add a little bit as you go. Also, here we have a case of two primary colors getting mixed, red and yellow. And notice that in between them, you get a secondary color that mix and make orange in the middle. And so there's a lot of things you can learn from doing this. Remember, the purpose of this is just to see and practice what happens when you mix different kinds of colors together. So when you make yours, just play with it. Have fun. Choose colors that you wouldn't normally put together and see what happens.